They say there are mountains that don't just belong to earth, they belong to silence. And in front of them, even thought learns to walk slowly. Mount Kailash is a of these mountains. Untouched, unreachable, forbidden to be climbed for millennia. It stands like an enigma that resists human touch, as if it holds something that still remains we are not ready to understand. But the question echoes. Will it be a simple natural monument, or an ancient point of contact between worlds? If you feel like certain things are no coincidence, maybe this video is what you needed to hear. Some say that Kailash is the abode of the gods. Others believe it is a mountain alive, pulsing energy, keeping memories that predate all civilizations known. There are those who see it as a portal. There are those who see it as a mirror. And there is also those who dare to ask, was it built? Because your shape, perfect geometric shape, its pyramidal top, its almost symmetrical lines, and its stories millennia, suggest something deeper than geology usually admits. Imagine a mountain that no culture tries to conquer. A mountain that everyone they revere, but no one touches. A mountain surrounded by legends that cross Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Bon, Tibetan shamanism, and traditions that predate any scripture, as if all beliefs somehow point to the same place, and to the same mystery. And when so many cultures agree on the impossible, it's because maybe it's not so impossible like that. There are ancient texts that describe Kailash as the axis of the world, the center of time, the point where the sky touches the earth. Others speak of luminosities, sounds that appear out of nowhere, compasses that go crazy, and travelers who claim to feel something like an invisible field vibrating around the mountain, as if it were alive, conscious, watching. And this is where the question that spans centuries arises. Kailash is a divine abode, or an ancient communication antenna, built for a lost civilization? If something inside you is awakening, stay until the end. The answer may be here, because sometimes it's not the mountain we're looking for, it is the memory that it awakens. What if the true ascension is within? To understand the mystery of Mount Kailash, we must first enter the mist where myth and history mix. Because before we talk about geology, energy, or ancestral technology, we must remember that there are places that are not measured by science, but for the soul. And Kailash, for billions of people over millennia, has never been just a mountain. It has always been a being, a guardian, a temple that was born before of the temples, a throne so ancient that no civilization has dared to claim it. In Hindu texts, he is the abode of Shiva, the destroyer of the ego, the master of silence, the point where time dissolves and consciousness awakens. In Buddhism, it is the house of Damchok, the deity of supreme bliss. In Jain tradition, it was there that the first Tirthankara achieved final liberation. And in the Bon religion, older than Buddhism itself, Tibetan, Kailash is the spiritual center of the universe, the place where it all began and where everything ends. It's curious. Different cultures, different languages, different symbols, but the same mountain, the same pyramidal shape, the same north pointing to something bigger than the man himself. And here comes the first revelation. There is no record that any people tried to dominate it. No king built a palace there. No empire claimed the region. None explorer left his name carved into his stones. To this day, climbing to the top is considered a sacrilege. The authorities forbid it. The monks disapprove, and even the most adventurous climbers, experienced experts, say that something about the mountain simply discourages conquest. It's as if Kailash wasn't made to be climbed, but to be looked at. Then comes the interpretation. Perhaps the ancient wisdom was not superstition, but intuitive knowledge. Perhaps the people knew that that mountain was not common. Its perfect quadrangular shape, its faces aligned to the 4 cardinal points, the top reminiscent of a truncated pyramid. All of this suggests a symbolic geometry, almost architectural. And this pattern appears both in religious cosmologies and in sacred structures spread across the world. When we look at Kailash with the eyes of spiritual science, he does not just appear a mountain. It looks like code. And then, human reflection is born. How many times in life do we also look at something immense, a challenge, a love, a loss, and we feel that there is meaning there, even that we can't explain? Sometimes the soul recognizes before the mind understands. Maybe that's why pilgrims walk hundreds of miles just to give a walk around Kailash, believing that each step erases an old weight, heals a forgotten wound, or awakens a memory that we don't know where it comes from. But it is precisely at this point, that's where the turning point comes. Because although all cultures treat Kailash as a divine throne, some modern currents begin to raise an unsettling question. What if this mountain is not just sacred, but built? And if its perfect shape is not the work of chance, but of engineering so ancient that it become indistinguishable from nature? What if universal reverence is not just faith, but ancestral intuition? Emotional synthesis leads us to a silent truth. Places call us like this because, say, something that was not said, something that doesn't fit on maps but fits within us. And the hook remains open, like a wind that crosses centuries. If Kailash really keeps a secret, why have so many cultures tried protect it and not reveal it? When we look at Mount Kailash not just as a natural monument, but as a recurring symbol in humanity's spiritual memory, something remarkable begins to emerge. In practically all ancient traditions, there is the idea of an axis of the world, a point where heaven, earth, and underground meet. For the Greeks, it was Mount Olympus. For the Nordic people, Yggdrasil. For the Incas, the highest Apu. For various Siberian tribes, the pillar that supports the firmament. And for Asian people, especially Tibetans and Indians, this axis has always pointed to the same place, Kailash. This cultural convergence is not common. Each society tends to create its own myths, shaped by its mountains, its gods, and its fears. But when different people begin to repeat the same metaphor, the same archetype, the same cardinal point, perhaps it's not a coincidence. Maybe it's memory. Maybe it's inheritance. Maybe that's what Jung would call it, a primitive symbol. Something so profound that it crosses generations like a spiritual impression left on the human soul. And here comes the first revelation. Kailash is a universal symbol, not a regional one. And universal symbols are rarely born from accidents. When observing the sacred geography of ancient civilizations, we realize that they chose spiritual locations at random. In Egypt, temples lined the Nile in specific constellations. In Angkor, Cambodia, structures reflect the stars of Draco. In Teotihuacan, the pyramids follow Orion's belt. The ancient world seemed to understand that certain places were more than land. They were points of resonance, portals, natural resources, energy convergence zones. When we look at Kailash from this perspective, he is not just a mountain imposing. It is positioned at a crucial point in the Himalayan mountains, almost like the magnetic heart of the region. Some alternative researchers claim that it marks the center of energy lines that would cross the planet, connecting sacred sites such as the pyramids of Giza, Stonehenge, Uluru, Lake Titicaca, and other ancient structures shrouded in mystery. Even though this theory is not accepted by traditional science, the coincidence draws attention. But the emotional interpretation goes further. People, who are distant and without communication with each other, they saw sacred mountains as bridges between worlds. Why this image returns so many times? Perhaps because human beings have always realized that there are places where heaven seems closer, where silence weighs heavily, where emptiness speaks. Kailash is one of those places. And for cultures that lived in deep connection with nature, this difference was noticed immediately. Then comes reflection. How many times, even without explanation, do we feel that certain places do they have their own energy? An old house, a forest, a temple, a stone, places where the soul behaves as if it were returning home. Perhaps these cultures, they were simply listening to what we have learned to ignore. But it is at the turn that the mystery intensifies, because unlike mountains mythological, Kailash is real. It is there, intact, imposing, inaccessible, and its shape suggests precision. 4 faces aligned to the 4 cardinal points, a top that resembles a cut pyramid, lines that look artificial. This brings us to the emotional synthesis. The ancient world may have seen in Kailash not only a symbol, but a marker, a point where the earth seems to talk to something above her. And here is the question that guides us to the next block. What if ancient civilizations revered Kailash not out of superstition, but because did you know something we forgot? When we begin to analyze Mount Kailash not only from a spiritual perspective, but also from the silent curiosity of science, we realize that the mystery does not diminish, it increases. The first thing that catches your attention is the geometric structure of the mountain. Its four faces appear to fall at almost perfect 90-degree angles, pointed directly at the four cardinal points, as if someone, or something, had aligned each wall with millimeter precision. Geologists say this is the result of natural fractures, but even there is some hesitation among them because such symmetrical patterns are extremely rare in natural formations, and the question becomes even more intriguing when we look at the top of Kailash. He is not pointy like other mountains in the region. It is flat, perfectly level, as a platform. This platform resembles a truncated pyramid, and interestingly, several sacred mountains around the world share this same characteristic. It is as if ancient civilizations were repeating a model that perhaps nor had it been created by them. Another impressive anomaly is the stratification of the rocks. The layers look so good distributed, so regular, that alternative researchers often say that the mountain it looks more like a building made of giant blocks than a natural mountain. Of course, traditional science rejects the idea of artificiality, but it cannot explain entirely why the layers look so different from neighboring formations. And then an even stranger phenomenon appears, the accelerated movement of time perceived by pilgrims. Several people report that when walking around Kailash, the hours seem to behave unusually. There are reports of groups that began pilgrimage together, but ended at completely different times, even keeping the same rhythm. Some monks claim that this is due to the spiritual field of the mountain. Researchers suggest that there may be electromagnetic disturbances in region, but no one knows for sure. Another intriguing point are the waters of the nearby lakes, especially Lake Manasarovar and Lake Rakshastal. Despite being side by side, one is considered sacred, perfectly circular, with crystal clear blue waters. The other is semicircular, salty, hostile, almost lifeless. Two lakes so different, so close, only separated across a small strip of land. It's as if they represent opposite poles, light and shadow, heaven and earth, consciousness and ego. Many spiritual scholars say they form an energy portal. Scientists prefer to talk about geology, but they still can't explain it. Completely their extreme differences. And there is more. Compasses often fail near the mountain. Equipment electronics present interference. Radio waves become unstable. For those investigating electromagnetic phenomena, Kailash seems to emit something unusual, as if there was a field that pulsates, responds, moves. This is the turn that challenges everything. What if Mount Kailash is not just a natural structure, but a singular point of the planet, an energetic focus, a geodetic landmark, or even a form of ancient technology that we do not understand today? A natural antenna? A hybrid construction? A geological device created to amplify energy? The emotional synthesis is silent. Even without definitive answers, Kailash seems to behave like something that talks to the invisible, whether spiritual, electromagnetic, or symbolic. And the hook that remains in the air, calling for the next block is, what if what we call ancestral antenna is not metaphor, but memory? When we mentioned the idea that Mount Kailash could be an ancestral antenna, we are not talking about a modern metallic antenna with wires and circuits. We are talking about something much deeper, older, and more subtle, something that predates iron. It predates bronze. It predates the very notion of technology as we understand it today. Because for many ancient traditions, technology was not just what man built, it was also what nature itself offered when aligned in precise, almost ritualistic way. The first revelation of this hypothesis is simple. Certain mountains function as natural energy amplifiers. Pyramidal formations, isolated peaks, platforms geological. All these elements create electromagnetic fields that interact with the surrounding environment. Scientists have already confirmed that specific formations can change the flow of ions, interfere with magnetic waves, and even resonate with natural frequencies of the Earth, like the Schumann resonance. If this is possible today, imagine what ancient people they intuitively realized it long before we did. And when we look at Kailash, we see a mountain with all the elements necessary to function as one of these amplifiers. Pyramidal shape, alignment perfect cardinal, colossal height, soil rich in minerals, proximity to two lakes with opposite polarities, and a history of electromagnetic interference. For some alternative researchers, this combination is no coincidence. It is ancient engineering, even on a tectonic scale. Emotional interpretation arises when we reflect on how ancient civilizations they saw knowledge. Perhaps the idea of antenna was not a metaphor, but language spiritual to something they perceived directly, a place where prayers rose higher fast, where thoughts became clearer, where the sky seemed to respond. Many monks claim that meditating near Kailash produces alleviative states, scared of consciousness, as if the mountain were an inner catalyst. And if that's true, so the antenna may not be a physical object, but a vibrational portal. Then we come to human reflection. How many times do we feel that certain places connect to something bigger without rational explanation? A silent beach, a forest deep, a mountaintop. This feeling of expansion, of presence, of stillness that we don't know how to describe, but we know how to recognize. Maybe the ancient world had words for it. Maybe they called gods, or spirits, or energy. What today we call it, an electromagnetic field. Names change. The experience remains, but it is at the turn that the mystery intensifies. Because some theories say that Kailash not only would it amplify energy, but it would receive it. Would you receive signals, frequencies, information? This hypothesis is controversial but appears repeatedly in studies independent. The idea that certain points on the planet would function as receptors, natural patterns of energy coming from the cosmos. It's not about aliens, metals, and shiny ships, but of the possibility that the universe has rhythms, pulsations, invisible codes that only very specific places can capture. Perhaps the ancients were not talking about gods descending from heaven, but about states of heightened awareness. Perhaps what we interpret as myths about communication, divine knowledge, was actually perceptions of a natural field of information, something that modern science has only just begun to investigate. The emotional synthesis is clear, be it metaphor, be it energy, be it memory. Kailash seems operate as a point of convergence between the human and the invisible, a mountain that listen and speak, an antenna that does not transmit data, but silence, and the hook that leads us to the next block leaves a question hanging in the air. What if the true signal that Kailash transmits comes not from the sky, but from within us? When we speak of Mount Kailash as a portal, an antenna, or an axis between worlds, we are in fact touching something much older than any myth written. We are touching what Jung called an archetype, a kind of memory deep that not only belongs to the individual, but to the entire humanity. And it is impressive to see how the symbols that emerge from Mount Kailash, the mountain sacred, the center of the world, the invisible throne, the silent portal, appear in practically every culture on the planet, as if the human soul recognized intuitively the same form, the same calling, the same presence. The first revelation of this block is simple and powerful. Certain places awaken something that we don't learn, we remember. And ancestral memory is not the memory of the brain, it is the memory of the spirit, transmitted through symbols, emotions, perceptions that go beyond rational logic. That's what it does. You feel like you know a place you've never been to, who understands an idea that never studied, who is moved by something that is not part of their personal history, but is part of the story of your soul. When Tibetan, Indian, Mongolian, Chinese, and Siberian people describe Kailash as the center of creation, they are not just making poetry. They are translating a sensation that is perhaps universal, that there is a point where everything meets, a place where the invisible touches the visible. And this perception appears in cave drawings, mythologies, oral traditions, and even collective dreams described by psychology scholars. Deep, emotional interpretation arises when we understand that symbols are not decorations spiritual. They are maps of the unconscious, maps of the sacred. The mountain, for example, it has always represented ascension, challenge, enlightenment, proximity to the divine. And Kailash, with its impeccable geometric shape, seems to be the ultimate symbol of this ascension, the archetype in its purest form. Maybe that's why so many pilgrims report similar experiences: vivid dreams, sensations of déjà vu, tears that appear for no reason, intuitions that change, paths integers. They say the mountain has spoken, but maybe it's not the mountain, Maybe it's the memory it awakens. The human reflection here is profound. How many of our fears, desires, and impulses most are these deep echoes of something ancient? How many times have we felt a truth that we don't know how to explain, but we recognize instantly? Maybe Kailash operates exactly like this, not as an external enigma, but as an internal mirror that returns what we forgot to see. But the turning point comes when we realize that these symbols repeated around the world are not just coincidence. They can be, as Jung said, manifestations of the collective unconscious, a kind of invisible network that unites all human beings through shared emotions, dreams, and meanings. And if that's true, then Kailash is not important just because it exists in the world. It is important because it exists within us. Emotional synthesis and makes it clear as the rarefied air of the Himalayas. The mountain is a portal not because it takes us somewhere else, but because it takes us back to ourselves, to a point of consciousness that we have forgotten, but that was always there, waiting for the right moment to wake up. And the hook that takes us to the next block echoes like an ancient wind that passes through centuries. If Kailash holds our deepest memory, then why do we feel that he calls us, even though we have never been there? There are questions that don't arise in the mind. They are born in the chest. And one of them is this: why does Mount Kailash call to us even when we have never stood before it? Why do we feel an inexplicable familiarity, as if something in your silence talked directly to what we keep hidden inside us? Maybe the answer is less geographic and more interior, because the true crossing was never about reaching the top of the mountain, but about discovering what lies at our own center. The first revelation from this block is this: ancient people believed that walking around of Kailash, and not about him, was what truly transformed the soul. They knew that certain heights were not made for the feet, but for the spirit. Hence the pilgrimage, called Kora, was never a physical act. It was an emotional purification ritual. Every step a fear was left behind. With each breath a weight dissolved. Every around, an inner layer crumbled, as if the mountain removed one by one the invisible armor that we carry without realizing it. But emotional interpretation deepens this perception even further, because in front of something so vast and silent, we are forced to confront what we avoid in our daily lives: our fragility, our voids, our greatness too. Kailash's presence is so immense that it makes the ego shrink, and when the ego diminishes, the heart speaks. And when the heart speaks, we begin to hear truths that do not fit into the noise of the modern world. This is why many pilgrims say that approaching the mountain is as if get closer to themselves. They describe strange sensations, a sudden clarity, an unexpected forgiveness, an ancient courage that seemed dormant, as if the mountain not just observe, but return what we forgot to feel. And this sensation, this return to the essential, is something that no map explains but every seeker understands. Then human reflection arises. Perhaps the attraction to Kailash is not about the mountain in itself, but about what it symbolizes. It represents the center, the origin, the point of balance between what we were, what we are, and what we can become. It is the archetype of fresh start, and every human being at some point feels the call of a new beginning, even if you don't know how to name it. But it is at the turn that the mystery intensifies. Because according to some Tibetan monks, no one approaches Kailash by chance. They say the mountain calls only those who are ready for an inner change. It doesn't matter if the person does the physically pilgrimage or just contemplating the mountain in images or stories. The call is energetic, not geographic. If that's true, then maybe you're listening this calling now. Maybe you're here because something in you has already started to change, even that you haven't yet realized. The emotional synthesis is simple and profound. Kailash does not awaken responses. He awakens questions. Questions that don't break us, but set us free. Questions that enlighten. Questions that bring us closer to who we really are, beyond fears and masks and daily obligations. And the hook that takes you to the final block like a sigh that becomes a portal is this: what if what we seek in Kailash is not in the mountain, but in what it awakens in us? There are places that don't need to be understood. They need to be felt. Mount Kailash, with its impossible form, its ancestral silence, and its magnetism that crosses cultures, is one of those places. He doesn't respond. He returns it. He doesn't explain. He mirrors. It's as if every stone, every shadow, every curve of the mountain carried a memory that was not belongs to time, but to infinity. And perhaps the real mystery of Kailash is not whether it is the abode of the gods or an old communication antenna. Perhaps the question is different. Why, when we contemplate this mountain, we feel that we are facing something we have always known, but have we forgotten? There is a silent, almost intimate recognition, as if the soul muttered, "I've already been here." Traditions say that walking around Kailash erases the weight of a lifetime, that each turn heals an old pain, that each step dissolves a shadow. But maybe the power is not in the return, but in what it awakens, the ability to look inside with the same reverence as we look at the mountain. Because deep down, we all carry an internal Kailash, a sacred, inaccessible point that no one can climb for us. A place inside the soul where silence is most truer than any palavra, a center that cannot be built. Remember, if this journey touched something in you, don't ignore it. Places like this don't call us for chance. Sometimes they just remind us of the path that was always there. If this message awakened something inside you, subscribe and follow us. Your soul may be remembering the path. And as we say goodbye to this mountain that never lets itself be touched, one last question remains, as old as the Himalayan wind. What if what we call the end is just the beginning of a memory that the soul, haven't you forgotten yet?